Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness and spirituality. I'm incredibly excited to introduce my next guest, Richard Rudd, who is the creator of the Gene Keys. For those of you who don't know about the Gene Keys, you can navigate to genekeys.com and download your own hologenetic profile. I have personally taken all of the major Golden Path courses online, which we'll dive into today, and I've read many parts of the book, which I highly recommend that you check out. Just read one page of the book and you'll realize that you've stumbled into the world of a true mystic and poet. It's quite profound and leaves you in a state of contemplation and reflection. An international teacher, mystic, and poet, Richard Rudd has studied with great teachers in the East, traveled through the Himalayas, the Pacific, the Americas, and the Arctic. He trained as a teacher of Qigong and meditation in Thailand and has also sailed across the Atlantic Ocean on a small yacht. Richard's mystical journey began early in life as he experienced strange energies rushing throughout his body. This catalyzed his spiritual search. All his studies became synthesized in 2002 when he began to write and receive the Gene Keys, a vast synthesis exploring the miraculous possibilities inherent in human DNA. It took 7 years to write the book and understand its teaching and applications, and just last year, in 2019, Richard was named on the Watkins list of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. Really excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Yasmin. It's lovely to be here.
Wonderful. So can you tell us, what are the Gene Keys in your words?
Yeah, I'll have a go. It's essentially it's a wisdom. And I use that word carefully. It's a living wisdom as opposed to a knowledge system. So in a way, it has more to do with unlearning than it does with learning, and it really brings to bear this art of contemplation, which is the central technique that brings the wisdom alive. And so, even though the Gene Keys kind of looks very, sophisticated with its big, it's got a great big book and it's got lots of programs and things, it's actually all pointing us towards our own true nature. And it's, every word and every sentence and every teaching is just directing us back to resource the wisdom that we have within us. So I should start by saying that. The other side of it is that it's a code book. It's a code system. It's based on the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, which is an ancient text from China, and that system has a direct mathematical correlation to many other codes in our universe. One of them being our DNA. Which also is created out of 64 codons. But it's not just that, it's the minutiae of the mathematics that matches perfectly. And there's lots of books that you can even read about this, written by, many of them written by Chinese geneticists, funnily enough, who found the correlation and know the I Ching. So but it's also a code that you can look at it and see it in many other living systems. The 64-fold matrix. So you'll see it in architecture, and you'll see it in nature through the phi ratios, and you'll see it in lots of different places in the cosmos. So it's a universal code. And so what I've done with it is I've applied my poetic, intuitive kind of logical mind, a blend of that, and then created this synthesis that can map the kind of psychological and spiritual patterns of our awakening process. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I guess that's my starting shot. I'll let you ask if you want to probe deeper anywhere.
Yes. So there's 64 Gene Keys, and, some are, I guess, more important to certain people than others. Can you talk about what it means to have your own Gene Keys and what kind of that means for your life?
Yeah, there are lots of ways into the wisdom, and one of the central ways that people enjoy the most is through its profiling system. So there's a profiling system at the core of it, and that involves you inputting astrological data. So you get your date, time, place of birth, and you put that in. And if anyone's listening to this, by the way, if you go, as you said, if you go to genekeys.com, you can pull up your profile while I'm talking and take a look at it. It's free, and it's just at the top of the website, free profile. And what you get there is you get this incredible map. And it's very different from astrology or anything like that, because it's kind of keyed into the I Ching. So you're looking at these archetypes and hexagrams, these 64 that relate to you, and specific ones that relate to specific areas of your life, as part of the code of life. And the other thing is that it's a journey, so it's not something that an expert talks to you about. It's something that you unpick for yourself, as you know, Yasmin, if you've done the programs. It's a contemplative journey, and you use these keys and you contemplate them, and then you look at them in your life. And each gene key consists of 3 levels, the way I've understood them. And so I call them a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi. And the shadow is literally that kind of challenge, that psychological, emotional wounding pattern that's at the core of that archetype. And then the gift is what's hidden in that shadow pattern. So as we understand and embrace the shadow pattern, we unlock its potential. In a way, that's why these are called keys, because they're doorways that we can unlock inside ourselves. So it's actually through our suffering that we begin to unlock our greatest potential. And every gene key points us in that direction. And then the siddhi is a Sanskrit word, which means the divine expression. So you have a shadow that's the suffering, and then out of that suffering, as you accept it, embrace it, can come a creative impulse, a gift, which will manifest in your life as a certain kind of genius that you have. And as you kind of continue to open and expand into that creative part of your being, it'll flower one day into this heightened state of consciousness, a divine state of consciousness, because that's our natural spiritual evolution. So if I give it a little example, if I just take a gene key, and if you can pick one if you like, if you have a favorite.
I mean, yeah, I'll pick one of my the 4 that I have. It's 1, 2, 7, 13.
Okay, so let's take gene key 2, shall we?
Okay.
And this is the great feminine one because it's the second one. So, so it has all these what are called the yin lines, and so you have here. I have to try and remember what they are now. I sometimes forget the keynotes. It's orientation is the gift, dislocation is the shadow, and the siddhi is unity. Right. So what it does is it tells the story of every gene key tells the story of human evolution and of life itself, but it's also very specific to each of us. So that one is about, being lost, so part of your mythology, if you hold that key in your DNA, and if that's part of who you are, a part of your story, is to have a certain period of your life where you feel lost, and you don't know who you are, where you are. Whatever the circumstances of that are, is unique to each person, because it's about dislocation. It's about being separate from from your deep kind of sense of fulfillment of life. And so that can precipitate a search, a deep search eventually to find out, well, how do I kind of remember myself? And that's why the gift is called orientation, because as you begin to find, aspects of yourself by searching in the world around, and then finally inside yourself, you unlock these gifts inside, and you begin to realize that actually you weren't lost, that that was part of the journey, and that actually you're in exactly the right place at exactly the right time at every single second of your life. And that's when you start to come into the unity, because you realize that actually I'm connected to all things. I'm not isolated, cut off, lonely, distant. I'm actually deeply connected to every single atom of being, and every flower and every plant and every star. And that's the heightened state that resides in that feeling of, core isolation, loneliness, separation. But so the whole journey of humanity is actually contained in each gene key in miniature. But we have these specific ones that we unlock in sequences as we contemplate them. So another way I sometimes describe them is these are the algorithms of awakening, and they're coded into each of us. So when you put in that data into the profiler, it magically produces, it's not magical, actually it's quite logical, but it is also magical. It produces these sequences of keys for you to contemplate over time. And as you contemplate them, they start to come alive in your life and inside you. And then you begin to experience this process of awakening of your heart healing, in whatever style that your gene keys dictate for you. So it's a transformational technology in a way. Yeah,
Wow.
And it works.
Yeah, it really, that sounds, the journey that you just described about Gene Key 2 feels very familiar throughout periods of my life. And I am curious if people have achieved, let's say, the Siddhi, which by the way is spelled SIDDHI, not CITY. If people have reached this kind of enlightened state, are we as humans we don't just stay there, obviously. I'm curious if there's like a time component that you've seen people stay in this kind of enlightened state, and if we kind of can go and drop back into this shadow state, if this is like a lifelong journey versus, maybe more of a journey with a little bit of a destination. So yeah, I'm just curious if you have an answer.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think, sometimes I look at it and I describe it as the shadow is the seed, and then the gift is the flower, and then the Siddhi is the fruit. And of course, the fruit contains the seed, and the seed contains the fruit. So what happens in our life is that at times we may get flashes of that Siddhi, of that highest essence that just flashes through. It might be a split second where we see it or we experience it. And it could be triggered by any event. It might be the birth of a child. It might be falling in love. It might be, some moment in nature of perfection, where suddenly there's this, it might be deep in meditation or in yoga or whatever, whatever you're, doing, it could appear and it could appear randomly as well. And so as we take up spiritual practices and we begin to move down the path of an authentic, human being, then we almost start to kind of seduce that state of that, which it's not really a state, actually, it's a stage, but we can have flashes in states. You might even take some medicine or something, some sacred medicine or something, and have a flash of it. That's often how some people contact those states. But then how do you stabilize them in your being and in your body? And that's what the Gene Keys is all about. It's about how do you integrate those heightened states of consciousness, bring them down into an ordinary life. It might be extraordinary, but it's like a daily life is what I mean, a physical life with all the trappings of physicality, whether responsibilities. And so it's a very, Gene Keys is designed for everyday lives and ordinary people, in the sense that ordinary people who have enough curiosity to go on the search, they're ready to go on this search inside, rather than trying to, find resolution to their life or fulfillment only on the outside. So yeah, I think those states come periodically, and the more we move authentically from our core, then the more they begin to flash into us, and then they begin to stabilize in our aura, and we can help. There are techniques we can do to help stabilize them. And this technique of contemplation actually is the central technique I have discovered, or no, I haven't discovered it. It's as old as the hills, but I've realized that it has the capacity to take us the entire way right up into that realized state, because it is that continued awareness where we're holding that kind of gentle intensity of self-awareness. And there's also playful creativity to it as well, which sets it apart slightly from the traditional mindfulness route. There's a kind of proactivity in contemplation, and it's very beautiful, and it is about creating more beauty in one's life and seeing more beauty around us. And that kind of expansion in our life as we open to it deeper and deeper and deeper is what stabilizes those heightened states of consciousness. That's my understanding anyway.
Wow. So it's kind of like a mix between like reflection and meditation. Like the active component is really ingesting maybe the work. That's the best word that I've come up with for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and maybe you could talk about it being a transmission as well, that there's something kind of the coded piece in the work that really speaks to the cells, the DNA of your body and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, the Tibetans have a word for these transmissions, and they call them terma, which means treasures. And they're quite mysterious. So they are living transmissions of wisdom. And the Gene Keys is one of these transmissions of wisdom, and it waits for its time. It's almost like it's been waiting there in the ethers for this time, and then it gets brought down, usually through one person, and that one person then disseminates it, and it begins to then take root in other people, the teaching itself. And so, if you feel very drawn to it, then it can really take root in you. And it does have, as you said, it has this resonance to our DNA. And many people who just read the book, or just contemplate the book, have that experience of it can be a very physical experience. You're just reading, you might just open it at a random page. It's a big book, so it's not just a book you read, it's a book you digest, contemplate, come back to, and it changes over time because it's one of those sacred texts in that way. And it took 7 years to write it. I didn't even write it in that respect. It just kind of wrote itself. And I also don't, by the way, think it has all the answers to the universe, but it does have a resonance that sparks kind of cellular processes, through the truths that are written in there. And I think as we go on those journeys through those keys, however we choose to do it, it does begin to, that transmission of the wisdom begins to light us up from the inside. And then things pick up for us, like in the little book I wrote recently called The Art of Contemplation, I described this process. It's like a threefold process. It begins with pausing, and pausing is what slows us down so that we can take something in. We can take in, it can be anything. You can pause in the middle of a sentence. You can pause in a walk. You can pause in your jobs, your daily jobs. And those pauses, as we open them up and we breathe more life into our daily, goings on, then in those pauses, magical things begin to occur because your contemplation starts to fill those pauses in a mysterious way. It's not like you have to kind of think your way through this. And then insights drop in, and then those insights turn into breakthroughs, which I call pivoting. That's the second phase, pivot, because inside a pause, often a pivot happens. And a pivot is when, for the first time, maybe we catch a pattern, a negative pattern that we're playing out, might be in a relationship, might be, a moment of anger or irritation or something, and then we catch it. Or it could be anxiety, it could be nervousness that's running through the body. And instead of trying to kind of run around and make it stop or distract ourselves from it, in that pause, we have that realization, that breakthrough of, oh, I'm running from something. I'm not facing this. And then we start to face these feelings deeply. And that's what transforms them. And the third phase I call merging, because the more of those pivotal experiences we have, the more of those breakthroughs we have, the more we begin to merge with the field of life itself. So we don't contract so much when difficult things come towards us or challenges. We begin to actually open. And then everything starts to become our friend. It's like the Sufis called it, the God is the friend, the divine friend. And so everything starts to merge, and we start to become friends with everything and everyone, and difficult situations even, because they're all sent to kind of inspire us and awaken us. And so our whole reason for living changes in a way, because whatever happens to us, we can make use of it for our own awakening. We can welcome it and accept it, and that's the beauty of this path of wisdom.
That's beautiful. So pause, pivot, and merge is the process. Yeah. And as you were talking, I just sort of remembered my own kind of personal experience with reading through Gene Key 1. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase, and you know better than I do, because it's funny, every time I read it, I actually have a different interpretation of it. But Gene Key 1 sort of talks about how at the shadow state, that because it's kind of the center of creation, there will be moments of just like this extreme kind of void. And throughout periods of my life, I used to just feel like, wow, there's just such a kind of like this space of not knowing what's going to happen. And I kind of just know now that it's happening when it happens, and it doesn't happen for very long, but just being able to name it and to say, oh, I'm in the void now. I also know that as I walk through the void, on the other side, there will be something really creative at the end of it. Totally. And I am live a very creative life. But there are pockets of this, a pause or a void. And sometimes I used to just sit in it for long periods of time. And so it's really interesting that now I can just name it. And so that's been really, transformational for me. And I'm sure for anyone that walks the journey of the Gene Keys and starts to understand bits and pieces of themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really does acquaint you with those shadow states deeply, so that you can really begin to accept them and kind of, you can harvest their energy. You don't have to kind of recoil from them. Even those difficult states, like you said, like that could have turned into depression, but actually, by you not resisting it, or it actually turns into just something. It starts to transform. It starts to transmute inside you, and it becomes something creative. It becomes a creative impulse, in fact. But yeah, it takes some courage in the beginning, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, are there any favorite Gene Keys of the 64? And are there any in particular that we should pay attention to?
Well, I don't really have any favorites, but there are ones that, as I wrote the book, they kind of exploded inside me, and ones that kind of stand alone, like the 55 contains a prophecy. It's the only one that contains a prophecy, and it's 20 pages long, big pages. So it's like 5 times longer than any other, practically. And so that one is pretty extraordinary. And when I wrote it, I was like, do you really want to write? Do you really want to stand behind this? Because it talks about this time we're in, and it talks about, a change in the structure of human DNA taking place behind, underneath the surface that we can't yet see, as a new human is being born. And it explains a lot of the outer conditions and things that we're experiencing now. So that one's quite amazing. And then it's kind of sister Gene Key, if it's a brother-sister thing, is the 22. And I like the kind of shapes of the 55 and the 22. They're kind of reversed. And that was another funny one. Wasn't funny, but it came after I was very ill. And I was just coming out of the illness. And then I wrote that one. And it's all about the true nature of suffering. And it's the deep feminine. It's one of the deep feminine transmissions of wisdom. And in it is this huge, compassion. And its siddhi is grace. And it's very mysterious, and it contains esoteric kind of information that came about the subtle bodies and dimensions and what happens after we die, and when and how we transition through, phases from one life to another, and all these cycles within cycles, and time spans and epochs. So it's quite mystical in that way. And I was very surprised when all that kind of wrote itself down through my pen. But so those two are wonderful. They're a book in themselves, those two, and they kind of are mirrors in some respect. So I love those. Yeah, those are two good ones.
Is there? So I have a couple questions actually about each of the gene keys. The amino acid that is stated for each of them. What does that mean? What's the purpose of that? And I'll save my next question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I put those in because it's the gene keys is a wisdom that's just being explored by many people. And that's the invitation of the gene keys. It's kind of like an open system in that way. It's like all kinds of people with all kinds of skills and backgrounds come to this wisdom. And I'm not a scientist, I'm just a poet who wrote the basis down, the skeleton. But I also wrote in the correspondences, because everything has a correspondence. And gene keys is a system of correspondence. So every gene key, for instance, has an animal and a bird and a mineral and a star, and it has a correspondence to something in the cosmos. So you can begin to see that we're living in this, I guess I call it a hologenetic universe, holographic universe, where everything, as above, so below, everything is enfolded in everything else in a fractal manner. And so as you move through the gene key synthesis, it's kind of growing. And so the amino acids I put in there because I thought that, people would be interested to explore them, and doctors, geneticists, people might in the future unlock secrets that I am not able to, which is why I put them in there. So I don't kind of, there's no other reason than that.
Yeah.
So that they're open for people to come and explore and go, well, I and there are things that I've been told about them at times, certain amino acids, and combinations give rise to certain states of consciousness in us. And so every now and again, someone delivers a really interesting insight to me, someone who's an expert in that field. And so it's there so that we can all explore it together. And that's my invitation with the gene keys, is like, let's grow it. The transmission itself it's here to be kind of added to in layers. So I think it'll live for, I hope it will, many centuries of people diving more deeply into the field of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Super interesting. I'm glad that you explained that, because it gave me a lot of clarity. Gene keys is very different from, other methodologies. I'm going to ask you how it's different from human design for those who don't know. But what I find interesting is that when I started my journey and tried to learn the gene keys, I actually looked for a practitioner. And I couldn't find one. I mean, of course, there's a lot of material online. And what I realized was that the way that you created the gene keys was for each individual person to go on an individual journey with the support of course, the golden path. But it's really a personal journey. And I think that, it's done with so much integrity. Like, there's no one who's, a counselor trying to, spend their life working with people, because I think also maybe there's so much in it that not one person couldn't possibly become an expert. But I'm curious about that, because it's really different than any other modalities that I've seen, where it's really a personal journey. And also the course offerings online are very, very inexpensive compared to what I've seen. So yeah, I'm just curious what your
well, I guess I'm I understand rebels, being one myself, and so I really, I did not want this to kind of go the route of the sort of, it's not a therapeutic knowledge. We're not a therapeutic community. It's a contemplative knowledge. And so you don't need experts. and there are no experts. And even though I'm putting out a kind of, I do have some programs to help people come deeper in to the program, to the keys, so that we can work closely together, those who are really committed. But that there's no kind of structure or hierarchy or franchise or anything like that. It's a kind of system that is, I guess for me, that mystically, it was like I had this sense that this belongs to humanity, and in the past, the great wisdom, that's come through has often been sort of hijacked and used for profit and in various ways, and that's all perfect and in its own way. But this one, I just would like, I've always, my intention is that it brings people together and it creates community and it has a generosity at the heart of it. And I personally wish it could be free. And that is my one day goal, that many parts of it might actually be free. So that's a kind of eventual goal, and that people would then gift it on to each other. And so that's part of the process. But yeah, you're right. It's it is different from many things out there, and often people approach it thinking it's going to be, they're going to be told answers, and actually you have to put in your own work. You have to put in your own contemplative work. And I have laid out the framework, but then I've, the pauses and the magic are yours, and it can only come alive in your life. It's like, that's why people often ask me questions about the gene keys, like probing it. What about this and that? Like, what does that one mean? And I often throw it. I'm infuriate people because I throw it back to them often, and I say, well, I could tell you my insight that I've had about that one, but that insight is like not worth even 1% of the insight that will come to you when you begin to contemplate it. And then, and you have to, like you probably know, Yasmin, you have to kind of stick with it sometimes. You have to really go on contemplating it, maybe for a few weeks or a month or, and then it starts to ripen inside you. And then someone says something or something happens in your life and you suddenly go, oh, that's it. And that moment, that insight is worth, millions of someone else's insights, because it's your own, and it's one of those merging experiences. You've had a breakthrough and you've experienced a little bit more merging, because wisdom has ripened and matured and kind of detonated inside your body. So literally, when this knowledge came to me, this wisdom came to me, it came through my body. It was a really intense experience. That was before it had a name, before I knew it was gene keys. It just came into my body, and it came in as pure light. And I realized years later that the light of wisdom is in our DNA. It is deeply embedded in every single aspect of our physicality, right down to the smallest substructure. And it's hidden in that DNA. And so when we start inputting these codes, it triggers that light to awaken, and it starts to awaken through our whole body, and through and then it awakens other bodies that we didn't know we even had, that we were inhabiting in wider multidimensional fields that we live in, that we exist in, subtle bodies, and then we kind of, that's when the siddhi field starts to evolve in us, because the light starts to inflame, it starts to flame out from our core. And it's the light of our true intelligence, of our true being. It's love, essentially. It's the intelligence of love. So yeah, it's a very human journey, but it's really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many really beautiful poetic, just even phrases that are embedded throughout the book. And you just reminded me of one, which is, what would it be like to live a life with an open heart always? What would your life be like if you could just do that? And it's just, so there's a lot of things that you've said in the book that have stayed with me that are not even my own gene keys. So, yeah, I mean, I have so many questions. I'm trying to figure out where to go next, because there's a lot of ways we can slice and dice this conversation. But one thing I wanted to share with the audience is, after you've downloaded your hologenetic profile, there are these kind of 3 courses online, which are called the Golden Path. And there's the activation, the Venus sequence, and the Pearl. And I was wondering if you could share what these 3 courses are and what they mean. And I'll also share my own personal experience and what you should not do when you are going through the course.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, they're I guess, like, for me, I traveled those journeys first, and they came together in mysterious ways. So I can't really go into the stories, but they're really one journey into, like, as you said, purpose, purpose, love, and prosperity. And this is the journey of our awakening. And there's these 3 levels. So purpose is about the individual. It's about you embodying your purpose in life. What is my purpose, my true purpose? And in that sequence, as you unlock it, because it's only comprised of 4 gene keys, but it has 3 pathways. So the whole thing is like a path that you're traveling, and it unravels step by step, and the program guides you through it with audios and webinars and, meditations and things like that. And we're constantly improving it, by the way, and adding new layers. And it's a visual journey, but it's also it's an inner journey that you kind of take in your life. And, one of the core insights that comes from that first part is that your purpose is not something that you're here to do. It is something that you are here to emanate. It is a part of your being. So your purpose is about being. And so you have to contact that gene key of your being. And the shadow is the thing that's in the way of you being that. So it might be, anxiety, for example. And then you have to move through that portal of anxiety and open up into, like, the acceptance of it. And then you experience the love underneath it. So it depends on what you're here to be. But once you're anchored in that sense of purpose and you've got a flavor of that, then you're truly ready to enter into the second journey, which is relationships. And that's the deepest journey. It's called the Venus sequence. And it takes us back layer by layer through these specific gene keys and what are called their lines. There are 6 lines to each gene key. And the lines are very important in this because they show us wounding patterns. And so it's a bit like, we're threading a narrative, and we're looking back in time at the ways in which our heart shut down when we were young. And so it shuts down mentally. And so our mind starts to control, our psychology. And then that unfolds even further back an ideology that grew in us during, when we were very young, during puberty. And then even further back in the first 7-year cycle of our life, the physical structure, like when we first experienced contraction around our heart, that moment and how that grew. So all of this is enfolded in the Venus sequence journey. It's a heck of a journey. And it takes some time, like for you to go through that process. It's really good to do it with someone as well, because it will begin to unpick your relationships, and it will begin to open up those wounding places and show you how you can heal them inside. And it's a very sweet, tender journey. But as I said, it's not therapeutic, although it may have that effect. It's contemplative. So you do it yourself by watching your relationships and observing your patterns in your relationships over a period of time, over years really, and you begin to it's what I've done in my life with my primary relationship and with my kids and my family. I've really got to see my patterns really clearly, crystal clear. so that I know when that pattern is ignited or triggered, and I'm so clear, and then I can, like, I don't get entangled with someone else's patterns, and then your relationship starts to transform because love starts to reappear in places where it wasn't, and forgiveness starts to really grow, and all these higher kind of consciousness field of the deep love that's underneath, that actually transcends the sort of differences and the difficulties. Like, this love is all underneath in the relationship, and we come into that field. The Venus sequence strips away all that wounding stuff on the surface until we get down to that amazing love. So it uses our relationships as our spiritual path. It invites that. So it's a very serious commitment, actually. But the program, it's built as an online program. It helps you through that process. And we have a whole community in Gene Keys as well that will kind of support you, and you can connect with. And we do these things called virtual retreats where we move through the program together as a group, so maybe like a few hundred people or even 1,000 sometimes, a global group that moves through it over months, over periods with strong rhythm. And we're all contemplating the same sphere in the profile, but refracted through our individual gene keys. So we then come together and we share, and and a lot of breakthroughs occur. It's quite an amazing thing. And a lot of those, we're doing a lot more of those processes and programs now on, like, virtual retreats, because they have such a profound effect on people's lives. And then the third part of the Golden Path is called the Pearl. And it's about prosperity. And I love the ordering, because part one is about purpose. You anchor your purpose. Part two is about partnership. It's about you and others. And then part three is about the collective. It's about prosperity. And true prosperity flowers after the heart has opened. And I always kind of joke with the men, because the men always go, I want to do the one on prosperity. And I'd say, well, you got to go through the one on love first. and sort out your relationships, because then that love is flowing. And then what that love does is it begins to open up this synchronicity field of good fortune, and it brings allies to you that wouldn't have been able to, you wouldn't find otherwise. And then you kind of begin to understand what prosperity really is. It's not the same as wealth. It's not accumulation. It's constant, abundant flow that you're constantly in the stream of. And so you can live a very simple life, but be incredibly prosperous through your friendships, through because this love is coming through you living out your purpose and connecting with others through their purpose. And then you get to see this networking of genius, because you draw in people of a similar frequency to you, and that's really pleasurable. And it means that you find incredible relationships. You build amazing trust fields. So yeah, that's the Golden Path is a whole, long journey. Tell us about your experience, Yasmin, with it.
Yeah, I think in Western culture, we want to follow things on a linear path. And so I'm a very passionate person. So when I dive in, I'm all in. It's like a 0 to 100. And that's not the way that you should approach this path. It was very fascinating because I attempted to do the purpose course and then the Venus course like soon after each other and really fast. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like listening to each one of your talks right after the other. And then I realized that a lot of it just didn't stay with me. So I went through it again and started to like really take notes, dive in. And I realized that this was not a destination. It was a contemplative journey. And I think that the body needs to integrate a lot of what has been shared. So even though maybe at some level I really wanted to get to the Pearl sequence and, just really dive all in, my body, my mind, my soul all had to kind of integrate and reflect and really think about what I wanted to take into my own life from this. It's not just a listening exercise, it's a transformational exercise. So, and I probably will go back and listen to it again, because there's so much insight and wisdom that you can't possibly learn it all in one go. And there's definitely many things during the Venus sequence, which I had a lot of aha moments. It felt very spot on. And there's a lot more detail than just the actual keys. Like you said, there's also lines. So you kind of know how you're showing up and what that means for your life and how to navigate. And so, it was an incredible experience. And I feel like I'm definitely still in a beginner's mind with it. So
yeah, that's a good place to be. Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of time. Yeah. And Richard, are there any maybe anecdotal stories that you can share from people who have learned their gene keys and maybe transformed their lives, or, maybe people in your own circle who have worked with the gene keys? If there's anything that you could share.
Yeah, I do hear, I'm a bit of a kind of hermit myself. So I'm a very real family man, and I just live quite a simple family life. And I'm not a kind of, guru out on the circuit doing talks all the time. I do a lot online, but a lot of stories I just don't hear. I actually, I'm kind of just doing my thing sitting here. But occasionally I hear things, and people come to me and they say, particularly with the Venus sequence, that, they say things like, really, really, this really saved my marriage. Thank you so much. Or sometimes it say it really helped me end a relationship in a really gracious way. And I love hearing those kind of things. And especially when it's helped a family, because it can really help people forgive themselves, like, people often ask about their children. Can I use this with my children? I said, well, you got to use it with yourself, because then you start to emanate love towards your children. You don't need to know their profiles and things. It's just not necessary. It's like it's for healing yourself. So I hear that a lot, and how great it is. And I guess funny things. And a guy the other day said to me, I was doing a talk on pausing, and I used the thing about, I said, if you're driving and you get to your car in a city and you get to a red light, and just as it goes red, instead of like being frustrated or having a moment of impatience, you might just go, wow, life has just gifted me a pause. And I can contemplate in this pause. I can breathe, I can enjoy it, I can look around, I can actually really drop in for those few, minutes or moments. And so this guy contacted me and he said, I'm a cab driver in I don't know, some city in the US. And he said that insight has just transformed my entire life.
Wow.
He said, I was racing from place to place, and I was never happy at a red light. I'm now like, I don't have any of that stress. And it was just funny because I'd used the same metaphor, and then it hit home. But yeah, you do hear these nice stories, and I'm always amazed. I love hearing them, how it's helping people, and it helps all kinds of people. And I've heard, people use, like, I do a lot of meditations with music and things like that, and a teaching called the Seven Sacred Seals, which is like a very mystical set of invocations set to beautiful music, and they're kind of loosely based on the Book of Revelations. And I know that people use them for when they're approaching death and dying, because they are about transitioning through the veils of consciousness. And so I'm really like, I don't know, deeply moved when I hear things like that this has helped someone make their transition, from death, through the portal, and in a peaceful way, with a sense that they can connect with, those greater realities. So yeah, I hear lovely things, and I'm really happy that the wisdom is going out there and touching people's lives in lots of different ways. And I'm always expanding it. I'm doing specialized things for for like I'm planning to do specialized things for parents and for older people, and stuff on death. I mean, I'm now in my 50s, so I'm kind of feel like I'm allowed to begin talking about that.
Wow. So incredible. Thank you so much for that,
Yeah.
Richard. And
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about your journey, how you kind of came to bring the Gene Keys to existence and what brought you here?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like I said earlier, like I had an experience that was just a complete surprise, and in my late 20s. And I was a bit of a spiritual seeker. There's no doubt about that. And as you read in my bio, I did a lot of traveling in my 20s. I traveled the world, and explored, and just on my own. I just moved from continent to continent, and really deeply took in life. And I came back to England, and I was living in a remote cottage with a friend, and I just woke up one morning. I just woke up in my bed, and I woke up into a heightened state of consciousness. And I'd never experienced anything like it before. And I was lying there in bed, just swimming in light, and just vibrating. And I could feel the presence of the light emanating into the fields far, far around outside the house. Like I could feel like my fingers stretching miles with this light. And it was just bursting through me, and there was nothing in its way. Because I'd had these energies in my body before, but there'd always been also blocks that I could feel. And that's what I went searching, because I wanted to understand that. And but then suddenly I experienced complete freedom, with nothing in the way, no blocks at all, just pure light coming through me. And it was intelligence. It had an intelligence to it, and I could travel along it. And it told me whatever I wanted to know, but not just information. It gave me sort of cellular memory, and that memory was both forwards in time and backwards in time. And it was like I can't explain it. But it stayed with me for 3 days, that state, and 3 nights. It didn't really stop. It was unbroken. And then I went on a journey, and I came down from that journey, and there was no drugs or anything involved, by the way. It was just completely spontaneous. I was just living a simple life. And that was how I got started, really. But it was very difficult after that. I didn't know what to do. Most of my friends were kind of, having families or getting seriously sort of, getting on with their lives. And I couldn't do any of that because I had this stuff in me, and I didn't know what to do with it. And it had no structure or form. And then you mentioned human design. That was something I came across as a teaching, and I went to study it. And I recognized something very deeply in that knowledge, and it helped me kind of formulate the Gene Keys that grew out of that, and many other things that I'd learned in my travels. And so it's a bit like putting together a huge jigsaw puzzle, basically. And every now and again, I get given another piece.
Yeah.
And then I put like 3 or 4 big pieces together. And I'm like, wow, look at that. And that fits with that. And the pieces are supplied also by people who come into my life, and they so people hold pieces, and they literally hold it in their presence, in their love, in their aura. And so those people come in, and then we work together, and then, more of the synthesis starts to occur. And that's truly magical, because it's a living wisdom. It's a living puzzle. It's a living mystery. So now I kind of have the feeling that we have, if it's a puzzle, we have all the outside pieces and the corners. We have the structure of the whole, and we're beginning to fill in, segments of the puzzle. And if you're out there listening to this, perhaps you carry a piece. I don't. It's a mystery that, people that feel the deep resonance, they come and they get involved, and they become part of the story. And that's truly magic. So it's not really about me. I was just the first the first one that got the first bit of the puzzle.
Oh, wow. You're so humble too. I mean, it's such a profound body of work, the Gene Keys, that I think unless people actually have the book in their hands, they don't understand the depth of this work. I mean, wow, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
Richard, just last two questions. What sort of things have surprised you on this journey?
I think the answer to that is I'm pleasantly surprised that it works. I mean, I received this thing, this terma, this transmission, and it's a tradition from the Tibetans as well that the one that receives the terma, the wisdom, has to be initiated by it. Right. And so I was seriously initiated. And so I had to become its student, and it totally threw my life into chaos because it showed me all the parts of myself where I was dishonest, dishonorable, just unkind, both to myself and maybe to others. And it just showed me everything. It was like having a bright light shined on the core of your being, and then you're going, oh no, don't show me that. and so, for years, like many of us, I kind of labored in this kind of slightly lost state, and I would try and do things like meditate, I'd take up meditation, I'd try and meditate, and I would, and it was just too painful. I couldn't do it. It was like, there's too much anxiety in me and discomfort. And there was this darkness, these clouds, and I'd get flashes of light, but there was always the clouds, and they were really uncomfortable. I could feel them in my body. And every time I turned inwards, I could feel the clouds there and the heaviness, and this sort of karmic load that I was carrying, the wound, I guess. And so my surprise is that over the years, the clouds have lifted, and it's taken years, and they've lifted and lifted and lifted, and they continue to lift. And what I found underneath is like joy, I've just found joy. I found joy and love. And that's actually what's in me. And I realized, oh my God, that's what's in every human being. That's what I was shown in that heightened state of consciousness, that our natural state is one of limitless love and joy. And it's under veils of karma and memory and ancestral kind of stuff that's held in our DNA. It's just all in us. And the journey is transmuting those memories and that heaviness and coming out of the tunnel. So my greatest surprise is that underneath it, is this incredible light. Even though I knew it was there, I still the human part of me couldn't quite give myself permission to fully embrace it and go, oh my God, I'm actually finally getting there after all this time. So I'm delighted to say that it works, because I was, the perfect disaster. and so if it works on me, it can work on anyone. Yeah.
Wow. Very, very inspiring, Richard. That's phenomenal. Wow. Amazing. I feel like we've just only scratched the surface of the Gene Keys, but unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. Are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about the Gene Keys? I know that you have many retreats and events for the year. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're doing these we've sort of become a virtual retreat center in a way. So we're sort of becoming that. So we're running more of these virtual retreats, which are lovely. So you can come to genekeys.com and see when the next one is. And there might be one that's in, and we're just learning as well, because we're really evolving to another level at the moment, because Gene Keys is becoming more popular. So we've got more funding. So we're growing and develop, because I've had to fund this from the bottom up, just from just my own pocket. And because I've never charged massive fees, it's just been organic. And so now it's growing, and we're kind of embracing the technology, and I've got an amazing team of people who I work with who will kind of help expanding it. So we have obviously books that, for people I'd recommend, like the Gene Keys book. If you want to really dive in the deep end, you could get that. If you want to go in, if you're more of a shallow end person, and that doesn't mean you're shallow, it just means you're more like, I need to go in gently. Then that little book on the art of contemplation is it's my favorite book. It's a little Zen book. It's under 100 pages. It contains all the secrets of the Gene Keys, but without even mentioning the Gene Keys. Oh, wow. And it's very practical. And I'm about to do an audiobook course that's coming out online as well. That's going to be very accessible and cheap, based on the Art of Contemplation book. So you'll have it's me reading it, and you can go through little processes, and whether you want to do it online, you can or not. So that's going to be a really nice intro. And there's a lot of free introductory material on the website, a lot. And I do a lot of stuff on YouTube as well. I always do these little 10-minute fragments of light, I call them. And my YouTube channel, Gene Keys, is like got loads and loads of things on all kinds of subjects. So you could explore there. And of course, I'd recommend above all else, like to get your profile and maybe do part 1 of the Golden Path, which is the one about purpose. And that will take you on, like, that'll just open up the journey to you. And as it hopefully it did for you, Yasmin, just kind of, it's a nice way to come in and explore and get the feel of what this is all about. Yeah. But there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's, I think, a lot of entryways into the Gene Keys. And I think that it's funny. I think the Gene Keys actually call you when you're ready. Yeah. So, so I say definitely buy the book, and open up any page, and you'll see the wisdom in it. And so, Richard, thank you so much for your time. It is just such a pleasure to speak with you and to learn more about the Gene Keys and your journey, and the future of the Gene Keys and the work that you're bringing into the world. So I'm just could not be happier to have sat here with you and have this conversation.
Thank you, Yasmin. It's been a real pleasure, and it's lovely to be reaching out to new audiences and inviting you in. We're a very global community, the Gene Keys. It's really gone wide around the world. So when you come in, a lot of it is about community as well. And so you're a lot of people meet amazing people, and people on the same wavelength when you start coming into the programs and things. So yeah, it's a big invitation to everyone.
Yes, definitely. For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about the Gene Keys and why they're so important to understand your life mission and purpose. You can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness and spirituality. Thanks again.